Learn to be super successful. Subscribe to my channel, Meathead. The kids go out and try to change the world, etc. Very few people can change the world with no money. Mahatma Gandhi arguably didn't have any money. That's not really true, but because he was able to get interest in him and with people with money, and so he ultimately got the UK government to let go of India back in the day in the late 40s. But so you'll either use it effectively, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or you won't. That's your choice. But I said yesterday, you can never say again, being candid with yourself, that you don't know how to do it now. Some of you thought you knew how to do it, and you made some scratching, in the planet or on the planet. But now you absolutely, categorically know how to create wealth. Now just imagine, one of the things I ask in the seminar later on, but I'm going to ask it now, because I read a bunch of emails. I don't normally read emails or comments to YouTube till later on in the week, but I decided to read some today because I was impressed that all 4 of our dogs were asleep on my couch when I walked into my office, and 3 normally, but to get all 4 there, they're all cozied up, and so it was cute. So I was sitting there watching them, and I was reading the emails, and it got me thinking that if life was just that simple, there'd be no seminar, there'd be no QLA. If prayer really worked to the effect that a lot of people think it works, there'd be no war. But it's not that way. It's not that way. If the university system's actually taught on a basis where you actually learn something to use out in the real world, but they don't. I've been doing this 29 and a half years, and I've been dealing with universities, and only just recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, do any of the universities have any courses that are even remotely close to the real world. And most of those courses are being taught by guys and gals that haven't done it in the real world. There's an Ivy League school that's got a course on how you buy a business. Only recently, and I'm told I shamed them into it. It's taught by a PhD, CPA, certified financial analyst that's never done a deal. Not one. It costs $64,000, and this is at the University of Pennsylvania. It costs $64,000 per year to go to Penn. So 4 times 64, about $250,000, not including books, room and board, etc. The average salary of a Penn graduate, when I spoke there in 2019, that got a job, was $67,000 a year. Hence, you had to work about almost 4 years to pay off, and that's if it was net. If they don't get 67 net, that's the gross salary. But let's just call it net to make it simple. They would have to work about 4 years to pay off their education. We have people in this room that are still paying student debt. That's, on the face of it, that's absurd. I want you to continue to pay the debt. I don't want you to walk away from the debt. But, and they're not the youngest kids in the room. So how can you, well, you can. How can you possibly be 10 years out of school and still be paying for fucking student debt? So the system's ass backwards. And most of the things, even though I went back to school to appease my mom because nobody in her side of the family had ever graduated from university, that was wasted fucking time for me. And I was paying $48 a semester, my tuition. $48. And a couple $100 for books. And I normally didn't buy all the books. And so I had, in a year, I had about $500 invested in counting books. And I would pay too much. And I paid too much. In this country, when you go to school and you graduate with honors, you put BS and then in parentheses honors, ONSS, ONS, like somebody gave a shit. Or when you graduate with a double first, that means you graduated first in your class in 2 disciplines in the same year. Who gives a shit? But life is this. This is the world that I know. It's the only world I've ever known. Whether it was from the barrio, the hood where I come from, or Gymnastics Group, Siemens, USA, Toyota, USA, BMW. This is the only world I've ever known. It's dog eat dog. And that's a bad metaphor to me because I don't like dogs eating dogs. And yet you are representative of every group that's ever come through here in 29 and a half years, with rare exception. Somehow you missed this intellectually, emotionally, but you missed this. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Now, how is that possible? That you missed it. Now, arguably, some of you are too young to have fought in any wars of whatever country you come from, and some of you are too old to have fought in any wars that have ever come your way. But how could you miss what the world really like? Your parents. Now, I'm not suggesting, as some people have written in YouTube today, go back and put a bullet in your parents' head. Metaphorically speaking, yes. Literally speaking, no. And they have their parents to blame and their parents and so on and so forth. But we all, although I'm significantly older than the oldest person in the room, it's either you, through your parents, use the management style of an ostrich, putting your head in the ground, or somehow you lived in a magical, like Disney World, where nothing ever went wrong and nobody ever got in trouble and everybody had enough to eat and everybody, but I know you didn't. Or as they would say in this part of the world, you didn't. So what the fuck happened? To face this, you have to have some grit. The Ukrainians, arguably, are showing some grit. They're fighting harder than the Russian soldiers because they're fighting for their land. I get that. I'm not so sure the rest of the world gets it. But you come from Amarillo, Texas. You come from New Jersey. You come from Miami, Florida. You come from San Francisco. You come from Seattle, Washington. How did you miss this? And unless you opened your eyes, I saw my 4 dogs today, which is unusual. Unless you open your eyes to what's really going on, like, am I the only person that read the NATO International Monetary Fund report about this time last year that says, a 3,700-page report that said, the world is at its apex, we're through. We're fucking finished. Don't worry about global warming, because if we stopped everything that all the tree huggers want us to stop today, it'd be 500 or 1,000 years, we'd still have a fucked up world vis-a-vis, gases going up and blah, blah, blah. 500 to 1,000 years. And I told you when I asked the university students, if you knew when she's carrying a sign, if you knew that, she said, well, I wouldn't fucking march anymore. That's not going to affect me. Part of the reason that you don't know this is because of the liberalization of the news. Because the news here on BBC is different than CBS in New York. The news here is different than ABC in Amarillo, Texas. The saying is, and not just because I'm a Brit, half Brit now, is that if the BBC says it, it's what the Bible says. That's not exactly true, but that's more or less the reputation the BBC says. BBC has, a British Broadcasting Company. The BBC allegedly, ostensibly, theoretically, can't be bought. Now, I can show you 4 or 5 examples in the last 25 years where I believe they were bought, but they're less bought than ABC in New York City. They don't have those slappy, happy, Good Morning America shows like they have in America here. But if you don't open your eyes, you're going to sit through this week, and it's been estimated from the data that we've acquired over the last 20 years, because we didn't keep data the first 8 or 9 years, that you absorb, the smart ones in the group, not just this group, all the groups, absorb about 40% of what I say. 40%. Well, 40% you're better off than no percent. But those are the smart ones. The gifted ones get 40%. The average rum-dum dummies like you get 10 to 20%. And if you're only going to get 10 to 20%, you might as well not have come and just sent me the money by fucking, PayPal and not suffer through jet lag. Because the ones that are 10 to 20%, unless you go back and you actually do as I suggested yesterday, if it's in a different language, you copy everything down in your native language that you're going to sell this shit in. And I call everything shit. Sell this, whatever country it is. If it's French, if it's German, if it's Belgium, if it's whatever. And unless you practice, and then practice, and then unless you practice, you're going to fail. And notwithstanding, his brother took a year and a half, and he was pretty diligent. But there's other guys that do it in 26 days. And you saw the difference. His brother looked like a reasonably, I won't say sophisticated, because it's hard to be sophisticated when you're just a kid, but reasonably sophisticated kid. He looked the part. I assume he speaks better Belgian and better Dutch than he speaks English, and he speaks pretty good English. He speaks better English than some of you in this fucking room. That English is your main language. But if you don't go back and you practice your ass off and step into the breach and not be afraid, one of the things I tell people, just imagine if you were born limitless, fearless. There was a movie 8 or 10 years ago about Limitless where a guy took a drug. Okay. But just imagine, in some cases, that sentence, that question, that quandary that I put before the kids, flips them to the other side because everybody's afraid of something. Unfortunately, most of you are afraid of almost everything. You don't frame it in fear. The girl that sat right there with that blonde lady sitting that gave her mother a heart attack, which, I would have kissed her right on her big fucking red lips if I'd known that during the seminar. But my crack staff didn't think it was important for me to know that she gave her mom a heart attack. I would have jumped up and jacked off on the table. I've been so fucking happy. And now she's crushing it on top of it. But unless you start to pretend, like the kids say, fake it till you make it. I don't like that phrase, okay? Perception is reality. When Sally and I were in France a few months ago to go to Normandy for D-Day, we went to where Aristotle and Onassis lived. One Champs-Élysées, okay? Which is right across from the Eiffel Tower, more or less. And now it's not flats like it was when he was there. They've got a goddamn, like a coffee shop and something. But he used to live in the attic with rats as big as cats. And he used to go up on the roof with a tin foil, or, when you give yourself a suntan, you put a tin thing around you and it reflects the sun. And he used to hold it with his hands like this, so his hands and his face would be tan, so people would think that he's either sailing, playing tennis, or on the golf course. Perception is reality. He faked it until he made it. And then the story about how he had bought a couple of shiploads of tobacco, and the tobacco was on its way to South America, and he's working the switchboard in the hotel he's working at, He's fucking the rich broads when he gets off shift at 3 o'clock in the morning, but he's in the switchboard, so he's overhearing all the conversations, which you're not supposed to do. Even back then, 80, 90 years ago. And so he decided he couldn't sell the tobacco. So he got one of the richest ladies in Argentina, as the story goes, to start smoking in public. And the cost for spot tobacco, as it was called then and is called now, went through the roof, and he made his first little mini fortune. Pretty disreputable, actually. But in the Onassis group, when I was there a long time, everybody talked about it like it was Halley's Comet, with pride. Because you can convince yourself in your little feeble brain of anything. So why not convince yourself to make the quantum leap and act if you had a pair of balls? Because that's what it takes. If you've listened to the Harvard tape from 1993, and then again, the Harvard tape, when I spoke there in 1997, I'm asked the question, one of the first questions out of anybody's mouth was, what do you how would you rate it, Mr. Peña, brains or balls? And I mentioned this yesterday, and I wrongfully said 90-10 in 93. I said 10% balls, 90% brains. When I came back in 97, I corrected that. It's 90% balls and 10% brains, and actually it's not 10% brains, 10% luck, serendipity, because I've always put myself in harm's way. I've always stepped into the breach. I've always gone, like in Star Trek, where no man's gone before. And I've never been afraid. I didn't realize that is part of my self-esteem. And I didn't realize, and you've heard me say this many times on YouTube, I didn't know self-esteem was such a rare commodity. Because I thought I'd hit $1 trillion in 5 or 10 years, and it took me 24 years. And again, first 7 or 8 years of life, self-esteem is built. In the homily in the Catholic Church, back pre-Vatican II, 1965, when they were giving the Mass in Latin in the back to the audience is back here, and it used to be part of the homily. Part of the sermon, you give us your children, and I can't say it in Latin anymore, you give us our children, and we will own them all the way up to heaven. You give them your kids your first 7 or 8 years, we'll own them all the way up to heaven. And that they were kind of guaranteeing you get the kids to heaven, which I'm not so sure that was probably too accurate, but, so those first 7 or 8 years. So, and for those of you that have kids older than 7 or 8, and unless they're very immature like I was at 7 or 8, don't go back and try to put your kids through this shit. You're wasting your time. You're pissing in the wind. It's too late for them, unfortunately. But if you got immature kids, because I probably had the mentality of a 7 or 8 year old till I was 11 or 12. You got a chance. But you just make your life miserable. And more importantly, you make your kids' lives miserable. And they're already destined for. So how much worse do you want to make it for them? Okay, YouTube.